There's obviously been a lot of conversation recently about the stock market, bond yields, and the US dollar. And I feel like the latter, the currency dynamics, are the least understood of those three. So today, we're going to talk about that link, the link between the US dollar and the US economy. But before we get into the video, I am Ryan Hartung, and I am a member of the research team here at the Macro Institute. And I'm going to be recording a bunch of educational videos just like these on our channel moving forward. So if you learned something today, all I ask is that you can pay us back by subscribing to the channel. All right, so here's where we currently are. I think it's important context. We have had a very strong US dollar since the global financial crisis. As you can see here, the US dollar index has basically only moved higher during that period. So what are the implications of that? There are certainly some trade-offs. The upside is import prices are lower. So a stronger US dollar equals cheaper imports. We can see that in the chart here on the left. Wanted to show you that the US trade weighted dollar is actually inverted here. That helps you sort of make sense of the chart. But basically, when the US dollar is moving higher, import prices move lower and vice versa. This can be a somewhat tricky concept to think about. So I'm going to walk you through a scenario. So scenario one here, we are the US importer and our current exchange rate is 1 USD to 1 euro. Now we are importing a car part that costs 1 euro from a German manufacturer. So it's really easy. It's 1-to-1 right now. I exchange 1 USD for 1 euro and I purchase that part. Okay, 3 months go by and now we have a new exchange rate. So previously 1 US dollar was worth 1 euro. Now the US dollar has strengthened and 1 US dollar is worth 2 euro. However, that same car part still costs 1 euro from the German manufacturer. However, I am the US importer. So this time I only need to exchange 50 cents or half a US dollar for the same 1 euro to buy the car part. So from the German perspective, in this case, they get their euro either way. However, for me, I just saw a 50% reduction in the cost I was paying for the import because the US dollar strengthened. So what are the opposite ends of the spectrum here? Well, a stronger US dollar, by the same token, means less competitive exports. And that's what you see here with the chart on the left. We have the ISM new export orders versus the US trade weighted dollar, once again inverted. In this case, when the US dollar strengthens, we see export growth fall. So let's talk about this with scenario two. A lot of the same things, except this time we are a US exporter. So current exchange rate, 1 US dollar equals 1 euro. Except this time we're exporting a car part that costs 1 USD to Germany, some German importer. So they exchange 1 euro for 1 USD and they buy the part from us. So we get our 1 USD. A couple months go by and this same German importer wants to buy the same car part from us, except this time the US dollar has strengthened. So again, 1 US dollar equals 2 euros. For us, the car part still costs 1 US dollar for the German importer. But this time they have to exchange 2 euros to get that $1. So for us, we're getting the same dollar, but for them, their cost just doubled, right? So before they could buy that for 1 euro, now they need to spend 2 euros. So what does that mean? That means me, as the US exporter, my exports have just got less competitive. So they might be able to import from a different country for 1.2 euros, right? Where previously it cost 1 euro, so they would do it with us. But now it's going to cost us 2 euros because the US dollar is more expensive, and they might go to a different country to try to find that same car part. So this chart here just combines the two concepts seen on the last two slides. So we're not going to spend a ton of time here. But just the main takeaway, you see the dollar index in blue and the consumer sentiment series with an export manufacturing sentiment series. So higher USD when the blue line is moving up, as we talked about, that means lower import prices and happy consumers. So the consumer sentiment is rising faster than export manufacturing sentiment. On the flip side, when the blue line's moving down, that means lower USD. That means more competitive imports, and we have happier manufacturers. Now, I have to be honest with everyone. I wish I could tell you that I sat down this week and threw together these charts for you, but the reality is most of these charts came directly from a small subsection of Chapter 9, Level 1 of the Macro Specialist Designation Program. You can actually see a full breakdown of Level 1 here on the left-hand side. If you didn't know, this is our flagship program here at the Macro Institute. It is designed to help people understand how macro trends impact equity markets and how you can successfully implement macro strategy into your investment process. If you're looking to level up your investment game, I highly suggest you check out the program. To make things easy for you, I've included a link in the description of this video. And as always, we're happy to answer any questions you might have about the program. Okay, back to our regularly scheduled program. So as discussed in the first half, the USD has been quite strong for some time now, and this has led to some really cheap imports and uncompetitive exports. Therefore, it should be no surprise to you that the US generates an incredibly large proportion of its GDP from consumption, from the US consumer. So here we see the basic and standard GDP formula. GDP equals consumption plus investment plus government spending plus exports minus imports. But just how dependent is the US on its consumer? Well, this slide should bring that home for you. We actually have the largest gap between consumption and exports. So we are really, really consumer dependent. And if you notice here at the bottom of this chart, you'll see some traditional exporters that also should come at no surprise, right? You see China, Hungary, Vietnam. These are countries that rely heavily on their exports and less so on consumption. So the exact opposite setup that we have, those are the countries that would benefit from a weaker currency. So you might ask, if the US wants to strengthen its manufacturing capabilities and make exports more competitive, why doesn't it just try to weaken its currency, right? That's what we've heard a lot of talk about that recently. Well, the answer is, and maybe, part of the reason we've seen the stock market pull back since some of these policies have been put into place or announced, is because this does not come without pain based on how our economy is currently set up. So this is a slightly complicated chart, but it really brings things home. So we're going to spend some time on it. You'll see on the left-hand side, we have net export growth in the US. And then on the bottom, we have US personal consumption expenditure growth. One thing to note to get started is that the size of the bubble equals the strength in GDP growth. So the larger the bubble, the stronger GDP growth for that year. And now, as you can see, all of the larger bubbles, or most of the larger bubbles, are in the bottom right-hand part of this matrix. And so what does that mean? Well, that's when we have between about 4 to 6% personal consumption growth, as well as negative net export growth. So again, this should not come as a surprise. As our economy is currently set up, we are heavily focused on the consumer. So when the consumer is strong and spending money, our GDP grows, and exports matter less for our current GDP formula. Last thing I want to note, you might see that little group of 4 bubbles that aren't filled in on the left-hand side. Well, the non-filled in bubbles actually represent negative GDP growth. And what do those 4 instances have in common? Well, we actually have negative personal consumption growth and positive, each around 4 to 5% export growth. So now I'm not here to sort of talk about recommendations about what we should do, just to sort of explain the backdrop of what we're seeing. Any policies that sort of favor manufacturers or exporters over the consumer, at least in the short term, is going to hurt our GDP. Now, you could make an argument that over the long term, it'd be better to balance this out. So we're not such a consumption-focused economy. That is true. However, as it is currently set up, periods in which the consumer is strong, our GDP growth is strong. Periods in which the consumer is weak, our GDP growth is weak. So that's what I'm going to leave you with here. I hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, I really hope you take a second to subscribe to the channel. I will talk to you guys soon and enjoy the rest of your week.